What's going on, guys? Welcome to another playoff preview for the 2024 playoffs, Western Conference. This is one of my favorite series. And joining me for this one, we always try to get authentic fans of their team, usually local fans, preferably. And we got two that I was able to find last minute. And it was a whole ordeal trying to get this one with the Wolves and the Suns. I got E, who is born and raised in Phoenix. And we got Reed, who was born and raised in Minnesota. How we doing, fellas? Thank you for joining me today.
Doing good, bro. Appreciate you having us.
So let's get right into it. E, you guys had a lot of expectations coming into this season. Bradley Beal coming in. How has the Bradley Beal move felt? Because he's missed so many games this season. KD's first full year as a Sun. You guys finished in the 6th seed. Let me know how it's gone from your perspective as a Suns fan.
I think first and foremost, the Brad trade was like overwhelming for a lot of fans. It kind of was a divide early on between like adding another 50 million guy that's offensive minded. A lot of people were like, they felt some redundancy in the move, but I feel like last 20, 30 games, we kind of saw the first gelling of that big three to the best of its ability, where he was really the more point oriented guard on the roster. Handling a lot of the defensive responsibilities on the other end. And I think surprised a lot of people. I mean, a few of us kind of like stuck it out with him and knew what he was bringing to the table. But, it definitely took some time for the majority of the fans, I'll say, to kind of groove with him and see him grow in his role. I think in individual aspect, like his closing to the season inspired a lot of confidence. The Suns definitely dropped some games towards the end there that definitely have people raising super valid question marks about him, but his individual performance, it felt like the most comfortable he's looked all year. So the experience right now is exactly that. Like, they're a volatile team. They have a high floor and a low ceiling. I think that's just something that comes with a roster that got put together inside the last 12 months. There's been some ups and some downs, but obviously we've seen, some of the capabilities once they've been all out there together, and they've won some big games against good teams. So hoping to put together more of it in this series starting tomorrow.
Okay, so it sounds like you feel like Beal's been playing his best basketball as a Sun going into the playoffs. That's amazing. You
Definitely.
mentioned defense with Beal, because we haven't heard about Bradley Beal playing defense in years. So, and I have heard that from multiple Suns fans. Reed, for you, your team has been a playing team the last 2 seasons, correct? But this season took a huge leap that I don't think anyone saw coming. Maybe you guys did, but like flirting with the 1 seed, finishing 3rd. It's been an unbelievable year for the Wolves. And it seems like that's actually a team I've been watching a lot this season. The defense has been special. Talk to me about what's been so amazing about this Wolves team and how much it really surprised, the Wolves fans.
Yeah, I think it's, probably best to take it back to the playoffs last year, being the 8th seed and having to play Denver right off the bat, not a whole lot of expectations there. You can ask, players in Denver. I know Bruce Brown was adamant that the Wolves were the best team that they played in the postseason. And if you think back, they were without Jaden McDaniels, who, if you haven't watched much this year, is maybe one of, if not the best point of attack defenders this league has to offer. And Naz Reid, who, was taking the league by storm as, not only, in popularity, but, one of the best bigs off the bench in the NBA. Maybe the front runner to win, 6th man of the year this year. So you take those two guys, they didn't play, and, Denver still said that we were maybe the best team they played. That's a pretty big statement, considering I don't think anybody maybe expected the Wolves to be, the 1 seed as we were, for 75% of the season like we were this year. But I think there was definitely high expectations that, the team was healthy for the first time, with Cat missing however many 50 games last year. So definitely higher expectations. Maybe not this high, as, defense had to be what this team was, their identity was, had to be defense. You trade everything to get Rudy Gobert. And, if you don't play defense, then the trade's a failure. And they were the number 1 defense this year, proving that, maybe this did work out. And it's been a fun season, definitely as a fan. And, you're so excited, and then you get to the playoffs and you potentially run into the last team you want to play in Phoenix, who is, a nightmare mismatch. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later, but Definitely a roller coaster of emotions in the last week.
E, as far as your team, do you feel what do you think this team's record would have been approximately had Beal played like 60 games? Because he only played how many games? 40, no, 50, 53. If he had played, let's say, 7 more games, like how good do you think this team could have been? You talked about the redundancy of the big three, like potentially. Do you think that like what's this team's ceiling to you?
Sure. No, I think the record thing I go back to a lot because I think one of the Suns' best media guys commented around the time they lost that last Spurs game with Wemby that it was part of the Big Three's process. We were only at like game 30 or 40 that they'd played collectively, they'd played together, right? So, it's kind of like viewing the season from that lens as we wrapped it up was super important, I think, for most fans to remember, like, hey, it's a new team that's like really at their halfway point of figuring out what it looks like to be at their best, right? So, 7 to 10 games more of Brad, I don't know if it would have made a huge difference record-wise. I mean, maybe you nab a 50th, 51st win and we're playing the Clips instead. But I think really, we saw some of those performances where, it looked like they had such a low floor. They didn't really belong in any conversations with real contenders because it took so long for them to gel, right? So like is 7 to 10 games really adding that much more in terms of a record? I don't personally believe so. I mean, here and there, I think you could have picked up some extra wins, but in terms of the ceiling for this team, it really comes down to like, what are you going to get out of the big three at this point? We kind of know what to expect from them. KD and Book last year had a pretty solid postseason. And like I mentioned, Brad's going into the playoffs with what I think is his best basketball of the season, but the accessory guys are really going to matter. I think we saw this year, like if you're putting a big three together, $350 million guys, like the others really have to play in their roles at an extremely high level, especially with a team as like cohesive as Minnesota with such a clear identity. Like they're going into like year 2 or 3 where I feel like they really believe they know who they are. Whereas Phoenix, it's like been game to game. Like, who are they? Are they a big bruising team with Nurk, eating glass, or are they a small ball 5, KD switching everything type team? It's really touch and go. As far as what their ceiling is, it's just you're going to have to be able to carve out that identity against a team who knows exactly what they are. Do I think they could compete with the best of them? Sure, I've seen it, but I also think, they have games where they came out like the Clips game, you're down 35-4 in the first quarter. That's not indicative of a contender. So I get why people's question marks are what they are. But at the same time, I see games like, going back to back in Denver, winning 2 road games there. It's like, okay, these guys can't compete at a high level. It's just going to come down to, are the big three all there present? And are the others playing in their roles at a high level?
Would you say you're disappointed this season?
I'd say at one point I was disappointed. Because some of the performances were so flat. Like there was a couple times early in the season where the home games had no energy to them. It's like the fans are probably the most excited they've ever been going into a season. And you're coming out flat against the Spurs and the Nets, which that was a huge one. It was like the Big Three's first game. You're playing the Nets. It's like the talk of the trade is spurring back up and you come out flat and lose by like 10. So there was times of disappointment, but I think if I bring it back to like what the conversations inside that locker room should be, what the conversations inside that organization should be, it's like, hey, we're early in this process. This was probably going to take more time than anybody's expectations could have realistically meshed with. So disappointed at times, sure, but like to end up with 49 wins, given if you would have told me at the beginning of the year, hey, Brad's going to miss 30, Book's going to miss like 20. They're not going to play it together a ton. They're going to miss games, not all at the same time. It's going to be scattered. 1 or 2 are going to be missing time at different times. So, 49 wins, 6 seed. It's probably the best scenario we could have asked for given the context, but it was definitely some low points.
Reed, for your team, there's been a lot of controversy about the Rudy Gobert trade and how much you guys gave up and all that. You talked about the defense, and I've been able to watch a lot of Minnesota games. It was funny because throughout the season, I want to say like 30 to 40 games went by, and I watch every Laker and Clipper game. Basically, that's what we like cover on a nightly basis, like with my channel. But we hadn't played the Timberwolves. Neither team had played the Timberwolves for a while. So I was like, man, I can't wait to watch a full Timberwolves game to see why the number 1 seed. And then all of a sudden, both teams started playing the Wolves a ton. Clippers obviously had some big games against them. We were both we were flirting for the 1 seed for a bit till we got it, and then we just fell off a cliff. But your defense was impressive. You mentioned McDaniels, all these great point of attack guys. And the main difference you saw with Rudy Gobert with Minnesota as opposed to Utah is now he's got the perimeter defenders around him. So it's not just him cleaning up everything. Talk to me about how year 2 of Gobert has been different in the sense that not just what I said, but how he's been received by the fans. Obviously you said you're not in Minnesota right now, but I'm guessing you still talk to a bunch of Wolves fans. I've heard the Wolves fans get loud for him. I mean, how has Rudy Gobert been? And if you want to do some defensive player of the year propaganda or not, whatever, you can go ahead and do it. Like, I'll give you the stage for that.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna need to do much of that. I think he's all but sealed, his 4th defensive player of the year. And, as much of a, good defender as he is, I think it's really helped coming to Minnesota because, in Utah, what did they do? They funneled everything into Rudy. They had, they chose to prioritize, shooting and offense and, just have Rudy down low and funnel everything to him and let him be the one-man anchor down there. And again, they had success, but, ultimately when we got in the playoffs, there was, you can only do so much, and it's a different game. It's a different beast. You come to Minnesota and, I think fans were surprised. There was really no talk of, this trade even on the horizon, kind of came out of the blue. And, I think people were surprised again at how much we gave up to get Rudy. It was an all-in move, 100%. This had to work. And, first year last year, you're thinking, okay, here we go. And, you don't even get a chance to really see how it goes with the 2 big men because Cat is out for, majority of the year and then comes back right for the playoffs. And then you're scrambling. So last year was tough. You saw glimpses, but you just weren't sure. This year, like you mentioned, again, just so much more success when you got guys like Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, those 3 on the perimeter. I mean, some of the best in the game when, you put your hard hat on, you're like, we're going to defend. Those are the guys you want. So it definitely helps having guys like that. The Wolves were able to, schematically do stuff a little bit differently. Gobert has been so good in drop his whole career. And as great as that is, they wanted to diversify a little bit more this year. And they've been able to do so. So especially for, different types of matchups you might see in the playoffs, it's good to have, as good as he has been in drop. I give him credit for being open to switching stuff up a little bit more, whether that's switching and staying on guards on the perimeter. I know people have talked about him getting played off the floor in previous postseasons. I think he's done just so much of a better job, and he's made that clear that he can stay with guards. He's not, a huge mismatch as many people might seem to think. So it'll be interesting. This matchup, again, creates a lot of difficulties for a lot of different reasons, but I don't think Gobert is going to be the issue. I can say that pretty confidently.
The Towns-Gobert pairing, how do you think it's worked out this season?
Yeah, so it's, it just like everything, it's got its, highs and lows. Ideally, when it's at its best, Gobert is patrolling down low and catching lobs and blocking shots, and Cat is stretching the floor and, creating mismatches that way. At its worst, spacing is a nightmare, and the defense just isn't enough because you're not getting, anything offensively. So we've seen that happen both times. Minnesota will go through stretches where it seems like they can't score the ball. And they've been in a lot of these games because they play defense, but it's like, if it's not going to be Ant, where's the scoring going to come from? So I think the adjustment has been, hardest on Cat, just because we know he's an all NBA player and has been, but his role has changed tremendously. I think one of the benefits of having, you never want to see a guy get hurt, but when Naz Reid stepped up and, got those minutes that Cat had, he was just letting it fly. He was not thinking too much. He was just out there playing. And, they got a similar skill set, him and Cat, but the way Naz plays runs a little bit more smooth with, how Rudy operates. And I think Cat learned a little bit more, he can stand in the corner and just be a catch and shoot guy at times. He can drive at times. And, at times it's just been a little bit clunky, and, you're hoping that they figure it out, but you never know. It could get bad. It could get ugly. Or they could choose to figure it out and the offense could get going. So I wish I could say I had the answer, but we're going to find out real quick.
I mean, I will say the fact that you guys are the top 3 seed. I think it's worked out pretty well. Whenever I watch the games, it's like you have 2 7-footers essentially out there. And I think Cat, maybe this is just my perception from the outside, and it's just he's playing with good defenders now, but it feels like he's playing a little harder defensively, at least from the outside. I don't know if that's the actual case.
Yeah, I think it's, when you see good defense, it almost inspires you to play better defense,
Right,
and
exactly.
that's kind of the atmosphere of what's going on. Again, I think it's, they choose to defend. Cat's not getting, the best matchups defensively. They're kind of sticking him on, non-threats, so to say. So I know people have, maybe his defense is graded out a little bit higher. I'm not convinced of that, but he has done enough to, not be a burden on that end of the ball so far this year. But I think in this matchup with Phoenix, who are you going to stick him on? Is it going to be, a Grayson Allen? I don't love that. Is it going to be a Nurkic where you're having Rudy on somebody else? I don't see that either. So it poses a lot of issues just because there's not really a guy you want to stick Cat on defensively in this series. And I think that's been an issue that we've seen.
He mentioned Grayson Allen. I want to hear about this supporting cast. This inconsistent, all the Suns fans been saying how these guys are just not it, which is obvious. And when you have 3 guys getting paid that much, the Lakers had the similar problem with Westbrook. They just didn't have great complementary role guys. You had that moment, though, where Frank Vogel replaced Grayson Allen with Royce O'Neal in the starting lineup against us just a couple of weeks ago. So talk to me about this supporting cast. That could include Nurkic, the role guys who's come in and out. Give us everything we need to know about this below average, I'd say, Suns supporting cast. We talk about the big three all the time.
I think the interesting thing is actually, like, if you look at the names, there was an expectation attached to him, especially a guy like Nurkic. But, like, to be fair to him, this causes a ton of division amongst Suns fans. But, like, in my perspective, I think you got the most out of almost all those guys. I mean, Grayson Allen was top 2 in the league in 3-point percentage. Nurk, another like low floor but kind of high ceiling guy, where at his best, like, the Suns look their best if he's distributing the ball in the short roll, playing as a hub, rebounding the ball. Like, the Suns look like they gel really well offensively. All the metrics say that, he's been above average deterrent at the rim, finishing possessions on the glass. Like, obviously the eye test is sometimes going to say, like, dude, this guy needs to get off the floor. We need to go small, whatever it is. But everything's so matchup dependent nowadays, especially in the West. Like, there are situations where Nurk is such an asset. A guy like Royce, I thought should have been in the starting lineup a while ago, just because of his fit next to Beal and KD and Book and them. I love him as just like kind of a smaller screener, another guy that can operate out of the short roll but actually stretch the floor, gives him a little bit of a pick and pop threat. He's a little bit stronger and bigger than Grayson. So in terms of like those top 6, 7, like, I really don't think Suns fans have a ton to complain about. The rest of the guys like Bol and EG, they've been mixed bags, but they've also had to play outside of their role a lot because of the injuries. So I've given them a ton of grace, but it's definitely time to put up, because Minnesota is a super deep team. You're going to see some really like well-oiled second units that have, 1, a ton of experience playing together, and 2, know what they want to do out on the floor. So it's definitely time to put up for, like a guy like EG. You're expected to come in, score, hit a couple threes off the bench. Like, that's going to have to be consistent throughout the series against those second units, the reserves. So
Eric Gordon, that's someone I love because he had 2 different tenures with the Clippers. So in terms of like the guys like Josh Okogie, Keita Bates-Diop, and these guys just weren't able to shoot the ball well enough from 3 to stay on the floor. Is that what ended up happening to them? Or do any of them still play? Yuta,
no,
Keita,
they've pretty much been phased out completely. Yuta and KBD were the first ones that got shipped out. Okogie is like end of the bench guy now. For that reason, like, it's just they're not solid ball handlers. They're not getting downhill. They can't punish on a kick out. So it gets really tough having them on the floor just as like a defensive specialist. And I think if it was one thing the playoffs have shown us the last few years, is like specialists don't really have a place anymore. You got to have like a unique multiple set of skill sets that's going to keep you on the floor, unless the other 4 out there are superbly talented. And even then, it's like you feel the difference when a guy like that is out there, a guy like Okogie, who he played a little bit in the Denver series last year, but he didn't have a ton to offer because you're not really stopping that, Jokic, Murray two-man game, and then you're not giving anything back on the other end. Guys like that for Phoenix have been completely phased out of the rotation. So I think you'll see a super tight 7, sometimes 8-man rotation. Big point of conversation right now among Suns fans is who's the backup 5 going to be. We've seen Drew Eubanks all year, which has been probably the worst part of the Suns' experience this year. A lot of fans clamoring for Thaddeus Young, who's played great in his limited minutes, but we really feel like we don't know what we have there just because we haven't seen him. We saw him a little bit in the Minnesota game on Sunday, had made a couple solid plays defensively and offensively, but also feels like he needs some time to gel out there. So there's still a lot of questions for the top guys on that the list of the others, the Nurks and the Graysons. I don't have a ton of question marks about, but like, what is EG? What is Bull? What is a guy like Eubanks or Thad, whoever it's going to be? What do they provide in a series like this?
Interesting. You guys both have a star player, though, that was a homegrown player that's ascended into superstardom. Ant-Man for the Timberwolves, Devin Booker for the Phoenix Suns. Talk about Ant for a sec, his maturation, the season that he's had, and like what he means to the Timberwolves fan base, because it's looking like he and Kevin Garnett will be the two on the mantle of Timberwolves history going forward, it seems. Because, Cat has been good, but we see that Ant-Man's just a different level of superstar.
Yeah, frankly, I personally think he's already there as number 2. I know he's still young and in his 4th year. I still think it's pretty crazy that he's 22 years old. I still don't think people really recognize that this is only his 4th year, but he's still so young and still so much to learn. But just his growth year in, I think we knew after his rookie year that, not only was there highlights, but there's something to build on there. And I think we saw in year 2 is this guy's going to be special. We knew that he was going to be, the guy to lead us. And I think very quickly, to Cat's credit, realized, what, this guy is probably going to be better than I am. It's probably better to give him, the reins. And, they don't like to point fingers on who the leader of the team is. They're great friends off the court, and which I think helps them both. But, I just think Ant is, playoff Ant. We're about to find out he's been so good in his 2 years, previous to this. I don't think that's going to change. I think he's going to be aggressive. And, when the lights are bright, it seems he's at his best. So really not a whole lot of bad things to say. I'm just super excited to see him, at the top level.
And the way he defends, I think, doesn't get enough credit. I think that's part of why the Timberwolves have been so good defensively. He really gets after it. This season, he's averaging a career high in points, assists, and field goal percentage. If you had to, even with the Minnesota bias, where would you rank him in the MVP ladder? 4 or 5?
I'm not sure I'd go that high. I think Minnesota's really deep as a whole. I think a lot of pieces that go into that. I'd say top 10, maybe around the 8 to 7 mark. There are still some games when, it seems like he'll look at the opponent and he'll take the night off. He said, I'll distribute tonight. I'll be less aggressive. And Finch has been on him about that. So he's still young. He's still figuring it out. There's been, times where he's been a little bit immature about how he's approached it at times, and that's expected. But, I think that, he was just in an interview saying he thinks he's going to be the best player in the next 2 to 3 years. And frankly, at this rate, that wouldn't shock me either. So lots to look forward to.
Definitely. Devin Booker, drafted in 2015. This is now his 9th season in the league. I'm very familiar with him because we've had our run-ins, 2 playoff series against each other in the last 4 years. Last season, he went to a level in the playoffs, though, that was absolutely insane. D-Book is averaging the exact same amount of points as Kevin Durant this year, 27.1. He's missed 14 games. KD's only missed 7. This has been one of KD's healthiest seasons in a while. So I guess you could take both of them. But first, start with D-Book. He's kind of starting to get in that conversation as the greatest son of all time. He's getting in that conversation. And then talk about KD's first year as a son. So many different fan bases have different things to say about him. I really want to hear from you as local Phoenix person. Kevin Durant, that's a huge name coming to your franchise. So tell me about those 2 guys and the year they had. And then after that, we'll go into the specific stuff of the series.
Yeah, I think to start with D-Book, I mean, he's going to be just a beloved figure here forever, and the work he's done this year with so many moving parts, like I commend him as much as I was really tough on him too. He was kind of burdened earlier in the year with being the point guard, and then that didn't so much work out. The offense looked a little bit funky, so he moved back into his more natural position. Brad went back into that PG role, and Book stepped right back into what he was familiar with, which is just go be a shot hunter, go be a killer, go finish plays. And we started to see him kind of groove a little bit more towards the end. Put up some big games at the finish there against the Pelicans. So it's been fun, like seeing him mature in terms of his role, in terms of what's being asked of him and the expectation of him. I think a big thing I'd like to see him aspire to is exactly what we just talked about with Ant, taking the other side of the ball super seriously. As a guy who's not as like athletically gifted as an Ant, is not as physically imposing, it's super important for him to just stay like mentally engaged and be super present on every defensive possession. And he's struggled with that. He's also, shown some really impressive flashes before. So we know what to expect of him, or I should say we know what he's capable of. So the expectation gets set at a certain bar. So he's been up and down on that side of the floor this year. Suns fans have definitely gotten on him for that and been tough on him. But we know who he is at the end of the day when it comes to this time of the year. He's given us some of the biggest highs in Suns fans history. Like, that finals run, the year following, as flat as it fell. It was a 64-win season last year to go, toe-to-toe with Jokic in like one of the most impressive series I've ever seen from an individual player. Like, we know who D-Book is. We know the type of conversations he belongs in. So it's just on him, to show up mentally prepared every game, on both sides of the floor, take it serious like a kid like Ant, you know what I mean? Or a guy like Shea, who's shown like real two-way play as a guard.
So Devin Booker, the last couple of years, I remember watching him, and he was definitely playing defense. So you're saying he fell off a little bit this year?
I think it was just a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Just an element of the season. Increased workload, as well as just like there was so many highs and lows with the season. I think it's like what Reed was saying earlier. You see your guys playing defense, you get engaged, you want to step up to what they're doing out there on the floor. And the Suns had some lows this year, man. They were really flat for like long stretches of the season, playing down to their competition. And I think a part of that was just a lack of mental engagement on the defensive end. And when you see a guy like D-Book, who's your one, who's your face of the franchise type guy, it becomes indicative of the whole team, right? So we really harped on him for that as fans, just like, if you're going, everybody's going. So we need both ends of you to be on point. And I think he's getting back to that a little bit, but there was definitely a stretch where it was something we were harping on for sure.
As far as KD, what are your thoughts on his season? He's been so healthy this year, played small ball 5 at times. I mean, give me your thoughts on him. How do the Suns fans receive this guy? I mean, it's been a year now. This is his first full season.
I think, for me, I got nothing but good things to say about KD, man. Like, of all the fun moments I can think about from this season, he was at the forefront of it. Like, just super consistent, two-way play, showing up every night. Best scoring performances I've seen from him in some time. Real awesome, like just a couple comeback wins that were like, we thought we were down and out. 20-point comeback in the fourth quarter against the Kings. He did it again against the Bulls. Like, he just stayed with it, regardless of the circumstances. Brad out, Book out, regardless of, who he was going up against. He showed up every night. If there's one takeaway from this season, however it ends, is like 35 laid it all out there. And like you said, 74 games or whatever it was, like he gave us every bit of those 74 games, showed up at a high level. So what any Suns fan that's got something not 100% positive to say about that trade, I would say go find another team for a little while, because this is one of the all-time greats, and he's shown up every night for the city of Phoenix. Like, we would have never thought, for a guy like Kevin Durant to be named in trade talks with Phoenix, he wants to go there. Like, it's been a blast.
Okay, that's amazing. All right, back to Reed. Minnesota defense. Let's look at this series. I'm guessing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to probably start McDaniels on KD. I'm thinking Ant's going to start on Book. Obviously, you're going to switch 1 through 3, probably. Do you think you'd switch Karl Anthony Towns onto KD and Devin Booker? And I was going to say Conley on Beal. I don't know how Conley's so good at defense still. It really pisses me off.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So in the last game, I think they're going to try and mismatch things, not necessarily be, so stubborn in terms of their matchups. But, they had Ant on KD, which I thought was interesting, but I wasn't mad about that. The thing about playing Ant on a star like that is, ideally, you'd love to play him on maybe a 2 or a 3 in terms of, maybe their best offensive threats and preserve that energy for offense. But it's playoff time. He's going to have to figure it out. I think they like that matchup with him on KD, and they want to have McDaniels on Booker. Point of attack, I think Booker is a little bit more of a threat just in terms of getting downhill, at least at this point in their careers. You can correct me if I'm wrong, E, but I think that they like that matchup a little bit more. And then Conley on Beal, that's probably what they want to do. Usually they want to have a guy like Conley on a Grayson Allen if he was going to be in the starting lineup, just because he does a good job with shooters and running around screens. Conley's, that's been his role typically. He's done a really good job at that, but you're not going to put Cat on Beal. So ideally that leaves Cat to kind of be the odd man out there. And, as talented as he is, it's just not a great matchup for them in terms of where they want to mismatch him. Grayson Allen, to me, is, I think, he's so underrated. That guy brings fear into opponents, and he's such a good shooter, and he's not one-dimensional in that way either. I think he can get downhill and beat closeouts when they're over-aggressive. So I think they're going to have to, maybe mismatch those 1 through 3. Again, you ideally love to funnel into Gobert to some degree and have him play a big impact, but they haven't had a ton of success up to this point against Phoenix. So they got a week to prepare. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something maybe a little bit different to, add a wrinkle in there. But if I was to guess, that's probably what I would expect.
I'm starting to see it now, E. I think the issue is you guys have the drop coverage killers, and that's what Gobert is so great at with KD and Devin Booker. But here's the thing. How much does their amazing one-on-one defense concern you at all? Like, do you think, because we've seen the last couple of seasons, I mean, KD did have a pretty good playoffs last year, as you said, but it hasn't felt KD's playoff performances have not felt as unstoppable KD since like the 2021 Bucks series to me. Devin Booker was the one that felt that way for me, because if you remember last year, I think we started with Westbrook on KD, and then they started with Aaron Gordon on KD, and then they switched it to Devin Booker. He was getting off so much. So as far as Minnesota's defense, does that concern you that they may make it really hard for your best players? Like they have the guys to guard it, or no?
I think what Reed was touching on, I completely agree with. Like, Ant is the perfect prototype of player that I've seen bother KD this year, like a stronger, real athletic guard. It's weird because, a taller, lankier player doesn't bother KD a ton because he's usually quicker than most of these guys anyway and can get a shot off. It's really the guys that can get into him and kind of disrupt his center of gravity that's bothered him a lot all year. And Ant is that perfect, like, quick, fast twitch guy. And McDaniels makes a ton of sense for Book just because he can really get into his airspace. He's so long. I really don't think that's where Minnesota has issues against us. I think it really does come down to what Phoenix can do to pull their 7-footers away from the rim. I think that's where they found success is, like you said, they can kind of kill drop coverage pretty well, and they can kind of hide, somebody that they don't really want handling the ball as much, but is a threat if you lose him for a second. And Grayson Allen, you'd kind of, take advantage of Cat being, 25, 30 feet removed from the rim because you have to locate him at all times. I did a little rundown of what we saw in the game on Sunday, and it was super obvious. The intent for Phoenix was get Cat involved in the pick and roll, get him high and away from the rim, make Gobert come up on a mid-range shooter, and then find what's open from there. So they can press those buttons a lot, but I think what it's really going to come down to is the shot variance, because Minnesota is such a good defensive rebounding team, and the case is that Phoenix is a mid-range shooting team. They're going to take more than just Book and KD by themselves. They're going to shoot more than the rest of the league. So, the shot variance is definitely going to come into effect, and Minnesota is going to clean up on the glass. I think that's what's really going to tip the scales one way or the other, is those couple of nights where the shot's not falling for Phoenix. How else do they generate offense?
Grayson Allen or Royce O'Neal? Who do you think is going to start?
I think they're going to stick with Grayson just because of the reps that's already there. Plus, he had a good showing against Minnesota on Sunday, so I don't think you disrupt something like that until you're, down in the series and you've seen that Minnesota has pressed some buttons that kind of makes that matchup uncomfortable. I think you start with Grayson, let him get some good looks with the starting five early, see how it goes, and if by game 3, 4, you're not seeing the results, then you can kind of pull that out of your bag with Royce starting.
So I can see that being somewhat problematic for Minnesota because you have those 3 good defenders guarding your big 3, but then Cat against Grayson Allen, that is not ideal. But on the other side, Reed, how big of a factor do you think Cat's going to be offensively? Because they're essentially, he might have to go up against KD maybe in the post. Like, you got to hopefully put some pressure on KD there, right?
Yeah, you'd love to think so. That hasn't always been the case, and that's
With
been
Cat,
the
100%.
right. Yeah, you'd like to see him be, a little bit more assertive. I think there's an art to basketball in a way, and I don't think Cat has mastered the art of drawing fouls. People say he gets a bad whistle, but I think he flails a little bit too much. And when he has a small on him, you'd like to see him just take his time. And, as you should, he's such a good finisher. It's hard for him to get to that spot consistently. So he's not winning deep. And what they've done and had success in previous years is, put him at the top of the key and let him go one-on-one against Smalls to give him a little bit more room to operate where they can't double. And I think Smalls have realized just stay in front and he's going to throw his body. And it's been problematic for Minnesota, and it's been, something for Cat where he's been like, he is playing a new role and it has taken him time. But I think in order for Minnesota to win this series, we need our $50 million all-star to show up offensively and really, win mismatches.
That was one of the reasons why I was so high on Minnesota when I saw them beat us, is that we had Terrence Mann. We've been always playing Kawhi or Terrence Mann at the 4 or whatever this team. We're a smaller team now. And there was one game where Cat, every time he saw Terrence Mann, he was being aggressive and going to the basket and bullying. And I'm like, this is where Cat can be amazing. Like, if he just does this, then the sky's the limit for this Wolves team. You guys have kind of 3 all-star caliber players because Cat and Ant made the all-star team this year, but you could argue Gobert has been the second best player on the team. And then the Suns obviously have 3 all-star caliber guys as well. But where the clear advantage is for Minnesota is those other guys. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Naz Reid, my boy Kyle Anderson. I know it's been an up and down year for him, but I really do think in a playoff setting, Kyle Anderson he'll play D and he'll make smart plays. And I think he's all-around game will help. I don't know. What's the opinion of Kyle? Because he's a UCLA legend. Like, I love Kyle Anderson.
Yeah, I love slow-mo. He was, fans were saying after last year, it might have been the greatest free agent signing in Minnesota history, which is a little bit sad, but that's how good he was last year. Really saved our season in a lot of ways. And then this year he was moved back to the 3, which he played last year at the 4. I should preface by saying that, and in place of Cat. Moved back to the 3 this year and just had a super slow start. Just wasn't effective. And I know we've all seen the jump shot. That's not getting any prettier, but he was just not effective. And it seems like after the trade deadline, he realized he wasn't getting moved and kind of settled in a little bit. And we're seeing a little bit more of, what we've been accustomed to seeing. And obviously we know he's a really good passer and playmaker. So just finding his spots and, he's a luxury off the bench. I think he just plays basketball the right way. It may not always look the prettiest, but he's just a huge piece that, most importantly, Finch loves to use off the bench.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I mean, I'm hoping you have a good series. We know about the Suns offense, right? But is the Suns defense good enough to win a playoff series this year, you think? And you can also talk about the small ball units they've been going with recently, because I see them going with the big 3, maybe Grayson and Royce or whatever they do. You can explain that a little bit, because I think it's going to be shown.
I think Phoenix can do some interesting things defensively. I don't know that I would call them an elite defense. I think they have high IQ guys and a high IQ defensive coach that has allowed them to hit a ceiling. I think even surprised some other fans how good they've been defensively. They're definitely no Minnesota. They're no OKC or Boston, but they have a lot of switchability when they're in those small ball units. They have a lot of cohesiveness in picking up assignments and stuff when they're on point. And you got a guy like Katie at the 5 who can disrupt up to the perimeter, back down to the rim, and be a rim deterrent. In the Nurkic and Eubanks lineups, it's definitely been a mixed bag. Nurkic is just such a matchup dependent guy. that as soon as you get him moving outside of 12, 15 feet, you start to have to plug some holes in. We've seen some quick teams that have a lot of versatility, like OKC, like Sacramento, really blitz us. Just because speed can really kill when a guy like Nurk is on the floor. So it's a mixed bag. Do I think they're good enough to win a playoff series with that defense? Yeah, but I think it's a matchup dependent kind of thing. Like I said it from the jump that I thought some of our toughest matchups were going to be, if we ended up with Sacramento in a play-in game, or OKC with the 8 seed, or Los Angeles, the Clippers have given us trouble all year because they have so many ball handlers that can put our bigs in trouble. With Minnesota, their pace of play and their style, it suits us a little bit more to cover some of our holes up a little bit, gives us some more optionality defensively. But then it's going to come down to finishing possessions, which is something Phoenix has also been a mixed bag at, and Minnesota has been excellent at, both defensive rebounding and not giving up second chance points. Like, they've been dominant at it all year. So that's really going to be a point of emphasis for Phoenix, is like, hey, can you play? What's the saying is bend, don't break, and then finish on the glass. I think then they can keep pace, even though the Minnesota Timberwolves have home court advantage.
That's a good point. Yeah, Minnesota can be overwhelming on the glass for sure. Reed, we're winding down here. What's the key offensively for the Wolves to not have those cold spells, that you talked about down the stretch especially?
I think that all year long, kind of the bugaboo has been the turnovers. Phoenix has exasperated those, and they, I think we had 19 turnovers in the first half last Sunday. So obviously that can't happen. It leads to easy points offensively for Phoenix, and you're just not getting any type of rhythm offensively. I think there are maybe some nerves. I know Ant has looked up to KD his entire life. That's his hero. Maybe there's some nerves there. I'm not quite sure, but I think if they are able to hold on to the ball and just not give free fast break layups, I think they'll be in a great spot with a chance to win this series. And I think that's really probably the most important thing for Minnesota offensively, is to just control the ball.
Okay, take care of the ball. I like that. Last question for you, E, before we get the series prediction. We know that this is going to take a huge series from the big three. Like, what are we thinking statistically is going to be needed here?
I think and obviously all we have is our regular season sample, and one of the Minnesota assistants, I believe it was, just came out and said, hey, there was some counters that we didn't want to reveal just yet. We knew it was a must-win game for them, and we're holding our cards close to the chest. But off what we've seen in the regular season so far, Brad is the X factor to me. I mean, I think the scouting report and the assignments are going to be very heavily forcing Brad to get more than what he's been expected to give this season, with guys like KD and Book next to him. And like I said earlier, I think the KD and Book defensive matchups are super solid. Like, you can rely on Ant and Jaden McDaniels to take care of their responsibilities all night and cover other people's responsibilities too. But who do you end up plugging on Brad, and what buttons can he press to stress Minnesota out? If it's they're throwing a Mike Conley on him, or they're going a little bigger and throwing a Nickeil Alexander-Walker on him, can he press the issue and force Minnesota to adjust early in games too? I think they have to pick one up here on the road in games 1 or 2 if they expect to win the series. I think that's a non-negotiable. Minnesota's been a great home team, and if they carry that 2-0 momentum into Phoenix, it's going to be an uphill battle for sure.
Okay. Would you say Devin Booker, KD can easily are going to have to average 25 plus? Would you say that?
I think that should be the expectation from them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they get slowed down and be forced to play make a little bit more, and Brad ends up being the leading scorer in the series. It wouldn't shock me at all, especially with, kind of the identity they looked, the last 15, 20 games of the season, where Brad had to step up and to be a more ball dominant guy and find his spots. If Brad ends up coming out being the 26, 27 point a game guy, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
So do you think you need 20 plus from Brad? Because he averaged 18 the regular season. Okay.
Definitely. You're going to need 20 plus out of him, and he's going to be the guy that's going to basically be forced by the defense with his matchup to capitalize on those opportunities, those mismatches.
That's kind of how it's like for us with James Harden with this Dallas series.
Yep.
Reed, last question for you. Do you think you need Ant-Man to be the best player in the series to win, or do you think you have enough around him to get it done? Because I'm thinking about those Nickeil Alexander-Walker with Ant and McDaniels lineups. Like, God, man, those are 3 good defenders to have out there.
In a perfect world, I'd love to say Finch has the balls to sometimes sit Cat on the bench and put Nickeil in there just for matchup wise. Not sure that's going to happen. I think it would solve a lot of problems, but not sure we'll actually see that. Ant has never played well, I will say, this year against Phoenix, and Beal's made it pretty clear why. They're going to foul the bleep out of him and not let him get comfortable. So he's had to get off the ball, and I think he's still learning that, as much as he wants to get his shots up, and he's obviously deserving of it, Phoenix is a tough test because they're not going to let Ant beat him. So I think if Minnesota wins this series, it's the supporting cast. Now, Ant's going to get his for sure. He's going to find ways to impact the game, but I think it's really the supporting cast of, can they make shots? The Nickeils, the Jaden McDaniels, can they make open 3-point shots? Because they're going to get them. It's just a matter of if we can get them enough and if they'll make them.
All right, fair enough. I kind of agree. I don't think you'd necessarily need Ant to outperform everybody on Phoenix. All right, guys, series prediction time. I guess we'll start with E. And when you follow, I want you to follow with your predictions. I'm guessing you're both going to go with your teams to win. Would it be disappointing if your team did not win? E, go ahead.
Disappointing in the sense of expectations from game one and the outset. Yeah, like you don't want this team to go out in the first round, with this roster, with the expectations on title. Like, yeah, that'd be super underwhelming, right? But I'm also I'm big on, understanding and respecting the opponent and understanding who you're going up against. Minnesota's had an amazing year. Like 56 wins in this West is no joke. They have a clear identity. They have a top 10 guy in Ant in terms of performers this year. They have Gobert, who is a standout decoy. Like, you can't really hang your head on losing to that team. At the same time, the expectations are the expectations. So I'm going to go as respectfully as possible with a Suns in 6. We steal one on the road, win our home games, and that's my prediction.
Love it. Reed, go ahead. Same question for you. And I'm guessing the answer would be yes on the expectations thing.
Yeah, I think it's been obviously it'd be tough to lose first round just because of, this is the second best record that we've ever had in the history of the franchise.
After 04, correct?
What's that?
After 04, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
This has got to be the second best Wolves team ever, right?
It is the second best ever. Yeah. So it's been this team and the KG teams that we all know about, but it almost feels like this one is the best just with the energy that's going on and obviously recency bias, but it feels like this team might have the most talent that we've ever had. But you look at the other side of it and, you're going against, 2 or 3 Hall of Famers on the other side that are, Book's in his prime. Katie's maybe a little bit past his prime, but I don't think anybody views him that way when you're on the court with him. So, if it was to lose, it'd be obviously disappointing, but you can maybe understand why. But there's just so much that's gone right for the Wolves this year. I'd love to say Wolves in 6 or 7. Respectfully, like you say, I'm kind of in the same boat. I will say I think this game or the series goes 6 or 7. Might be a coin toss on who it actually is, but I expect it to be one of, if not the best series in the first round for sure.
You didn't even give your call.
I'm going to go Wolves in 6. I think we'll split. I think we'll split both here in Minnesota and in Phoenix. Then I'm going to go and say the Wolves in the last 2.
Okay, I'm going to go with Wolves in 7, and here's why. The whole season I've watched, and it's definitely partially a matchup thing with my Clippers, but the whole season I've watched, the Minnesota Timberwolves look like the way better basketball team. Like, I'm being honest, they look like they're way better than the Suns. The only reason why I'm even pushing it 7 is because KD and Devin Booker, like, these are superstars. I'm big on Devin Booker. Clipper fan base hates him, but I'm really big on his game. I think he's been a top 10 player in the league for legit like 4 years. I've really been big on it. Like when all due respect to CP3, who might be the greatest Clipper of all time, that whole MVP buzz 4 years ago, he was doing great, but I just didn't like the narrative that he was even the best player on the team or anything close to it.
Agreed.
So I'm going to go with the Wolves in 7. I think the Suns have a chance just because of their star power, but I think the Wolves are the better team. Last question, yes or no for both of you. Can your team win a championship this year?
I'll let you take it, Reed. Your home court.
Well, I think, a lot of it is matchups, right? And let's just say we were to get through the West, which I think they have the ability to do so. And I'll explain why. Denver, I think a team that many people expect to potentially reach the Western Conference Finals and maybe the NBA Finals. We are maybe the best team prepared to throw people at Jokic, obviously, with our two bigs. Yeah. What they've loved to do this year is, put Cat on Jokic and then have Gobert spy. And they've had success doing that. So if there was really any team built to slow down Denver, I think it would be Minnesota. And we've played some battles this year. I think that'd be a great series on its own. If you were to make it, get to the Celtics, who I think we'd all assume would be the one coming out of the East. We've played a couple great games against them this year. So I think we have enough. It obviously take a lot to get there. Obviously a lot of basketball before that, but I think this would be a year that Minnesota fans, are we 1 year away? Potentially, but I think if all things go right, there's a chance we could end up there.
I think there's no reason why if you beat Denver, you shouldn't think you can win it all, to be honest.
Yep.
Right.
You?
Man, what I love about the playoffs is it's just a lot of times it's really as simple as, can you have consistently the best player on the floor, and can your 2 and 3 guys keep pace with the other 2 and 3 guys? And I think that's what Phoenix built their team around is, hey, we got 2 or 3 guys that can be the best player on the floor any given night, and the guys right behind him aren't going to lag too far. So for that reason, I'm just saying, yes. Have they shown it consistently? Absolutely not. I'll be the first to say it. But it's playoff time. These guys are built for it. They're hungry for it. So I think I'm going to go with yes.
Let's do it. This is my third favorite series after the 2 LA series. Western Conference, going to be a gauntlet. Before we get off, let people know where they can find you guys. Reed, go ahead.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Reed_Roelofs. I've been, building my own little profile there. I actually have another page called the Moneyline Masterclass where I do a lot of sports betting picks. So you can find me there on Twitter and Spotify.
Eat.
Just on Twitter at EA_AZ7. Mostly just doing Sun stuff, but we talk a lot of NBA. We like to keep an eye on just all the good stuff happening around the league in general. There's a ton of talent and there's a ton of good basketball to watch. So you can find me there.
Dime Dropper fam, appreciate you all. Please put your series predictions in the comments and give these guys a follow. They were awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining, and best of luck to you both.
Appreciate y'all.